right, Gator fans, this is a real treat for us today. We are joined by some special guests. I've got James and Alan from the Gator Nation Football Podcast on. I want to talk about what they have seen the last couple of weeks, what's changed from the beginning of the year, and kind of get their take on what's to come. Okay, so guys, first question, 30,000-foot thoughts on Kentucky before we dive in.
Alan, go ahead. Take it first.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was super fun. Kentucky used to be the place on the schedule where you would just take a nap, but because they've been such a thorn in our side, I took great joy in seeing them get obliterated by DJ Lagway. So a fun high point maybe for the season, which is weird to say.
James,
yeah, I think Alan. I think it was a good win. Even though, of course, I think each week I break down the film and I go through and we talk about like what's sustainable for the long run. Is this team building towards a championship? I think for Napier, it's fair to say it was very surprising in the way that it went down. Obviously, that's a good thing, and it was refreshing to beat Mark Stoops. Right? How have we not beaten Mark Stoops for 3 straight years? So I think for all those reasons, we tried to celebrate it this week as much as we could, just to enjoy it and not focus maybe on the things that we could or have focused on. It was a really good win for Florida just because it was a win versus an SEC opponent that had beaten you, not because you had beaten an upper echelon SEC team. There's definitely a difference between those two things.
Yeah. So defensively, it really kind of feels like Florida has turned a corner since the bye week, and I think maybe that's hard to say whether is it because we're playing teams that aren't as good as we were playing at the beginning of the year, or have we really turned that corner? What does the film say? Are we doing something differently? Or, I mean, again, not to belittle, but is it a product of the offenses that we're playing?
Go for it.
Well, Mississippi State actually sneakily has a good offense. That's kind of funny. Each week, in fact, you'll see they're putting up 21 plus on almost everyone, and they put up a lot on Florida. And that was sort of the last game that you mentioned that we've played a team that you would consider to have a solid offense. And then since then, we've had a lot of productivity. But I think on film, what you see that's different is we had picked on this a lot in the early season. Florida was playing a lot of what I would call very safe kind of style defense, even on 3rd and short and 4th and short situations. And that has absolutely changed in the past 3 games. Schematically, Florida is not going to be different. We're still going to run the same thing. Austin Armstrong and, of course, Ron Roberts, they come from the same tree, right? Ron taught Austin. Austin is very different, I think, in how he wants to call the plays. We have no idea who's calling the plays because Billy won't tell us. But on film, you were seeing a much more aggressive, deny the ball defense in what we like to call high leverage situations. There's no doubt that's different. Now, whether that came from Ron or from Austin, you or I can't say. But that is a different mentality. And Florida's success against Kentucky largely came with their significantly improved success in short yardage situations where Tennessee, despite the fact that Florida loaded the box up, they couldn't get those stops on critical 3rd and short, 4th and short. They did against Tennessee. So that was a continued progression for them as well to improve in those short yardage situations in big moments in this game. So the improvement is real. I think Florida has a lot of talent on defense, right? We have more than 80% of our players that are blue chip players on defense. This is a very talented group. They've been really underachieving. Alan and I both expected them to have a good season. But on film, for my opinion, I think the defense is playing more aggressive in high leverage situations, more willing to maybe give a bigger play in order to stop a team from continuing to drive.
So are you saying you think the Tennessee defense was called the same as it was against the Kentucky game, but players executed better against Kentucky? Or do you think the change happened between those 2 games in the aggressiveness of calls?
No, it happened after the Mississippi State game. I think that they began to really step up. Yep. So the past 3 games in a row now, I think they began to step up.
Between those 2 games. So you think just the difference between defense, getting those stops against Kentucky that they didn't get against Tennessee, that's an execution thing right there.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Great point. Yes. That's not a scheme thing, right? It wasn't like Florida did anything differently. They lined up similarly. Hey, we're going to load the box. We're going to put a lot of guys in the line of scrimmage. We're going to move our safeties up to 3 or 4 yards off the ball, and we're going to try to stop you running this football. We just executed better in this game. I also think Kentucky doesn't run the same kind of power looks that Tennessee did. Tennessee really affected Florida with what you'd call their heaviest personnel package. They had 2 tight ends in the backfield at times, both lead blocking. And Florida's certainly not seen that before. A lot of teams don't run that. Kentucky didn't offer that kind of power package to Florida. But make no mistake about it, Kentucky creased Florida last year running a lot of counter runs, and they tried about 10 in this game. And I think Florida really only got beaten twice on those. So that's an improvement in how you handle that run scheme, as well as just improvement from game to game. But good point, Allie. This was mainly an improvement of execution in the Kentucky game. And it has to be noted, Kentucky was their own worst enemy in this game, in the passing game, in so many ways, right? They gifted Florida some turnovers, but as Alan and I said on the pod, those turnovers resulted because Florida continued to put Kentucky in third and medium and third and long, and that's what you want to do versus an offense that is not very good. Make them throw the ball in situations they're not comfortable with, and Florida was rewarded with several, fortunate, I think, interceptions, but hey, we'll take it.
So, I know Napier says, like, when he's asked, hey, who's calling the game? And he says the line, oh, we all are. We got a team of people that are doing it, or whatever, BS he wants to throw our way on that. I think that it's probably reasonable to assume that around the Mississippi State game, we potentially changed lead play callers, I guess, maybe, or because it does seem like the philosophy changed a little bit. But I kind of want to hone in on the execution portion, because for me, if you are calling things similarly and the execution suddenly gets better, that probably means you're doing something different in practice, right? You're coaching something different if the scheme's the same. So, should that be concerning to Gator fans that it took this long for whatever change to be made?
Well, I think partly, coming out of the bye week, they did make some personnel changes. You saw a lot more Jack Pyburn, seeing some changes at safety, and it's still the same strategy, but the tactics were slightly different. How they're using the nickels, how they're using the safeties and different run fits. So it wasn't just purely execution. I do think they did make some changes in player personnel, but also you could look at the play data and it's like, okay, this is the same defensive formation, but how they're deploying that is different too, and how aggressive there are, in where the players are deployed, but also how close to the line of scrimmage they are, things like that. So that doesn't show up immediately in data, but when you watch it, there's a real noticeable difference in how they're playing, not just what they're playing.
I guess I kind of toggle between being excited about this improvement and feeling like we have seen us turn a corner, but then also being slightly concerned that down the road, if changes need to be made, it's going to be a very long time before we're willing to make those changes and adjustments. And, I almost, as a Gator fan, I feel like maybe that's something that is still concerning.
Yeah, it's good that you're only slightly concerned. That's putting it kindly. I think that what we've seen in 2.5 years of the Napier regime are reasons to be very concerned, for all the reasons that I think all of us that have been covering Florida have been pointing out. And of course, it shouldn't be lost on any of us that the rotation was 2 for Mertz, 1 for Lagway. The best offensive game we have versus an SEC team in Napier's history essentially occurred last week,
right,
where you played your true freshman every single game. And not, we weren't the only ones calling for that to happen after what we saw on Sanford based on film. And that's no slight to Mertz.
No.
It's partially the reality that Lagway might be the antidote to Billy Napier's offensive coaching, because he's going to force the ball down the field. And if he completes those passes, Napier's offense all of a sudden looks a lot better. But there are a host of reasons to be concerned with what's going on with Florida at a coaching level beyond just the on-field X's and O's. As you mentioned, we have 2 defensive coordinators with wildly varying titles getting paid a lot of money, and we don't even know who's calling the plays. There's very few teams in the NFL or college where you couldn't ask the coach who is the play caller on game day, and they don't automatically just tell you. Well, on Florida's offense and defense, we technically don't know. And that's outrageous, I think, for a lot of levels. And then on top of what you said, Florida was just wildly unprepared for the first couple of serious games they played at home. There's no excuse for that. That's not going to build confidence. So I don't think Florida's turned a corner. We had asked ourselves that question. I do think there's been improvement on the football team. And that's the first time that we've really seen a Florida team improve from the start of the year till where we are now. The great news is, Allie, we're going to find out soon enough, right? Florida has enough tests on the schedule that we don't have to speculate. We're not going to play a cupcake schedule where we guess what's going to happen. We're going to find out just how real this improvement is. Florida has a top 15, roster regarded talent. We need to be competitive in these games if we truly turn the corner. And then we're going to see again, how does Billy coach? Because in my opinion, Florida wins the game against Tennessee with even average level coaching. But Billy's decision points time and time again in that game cost Florida a win on the road against a top 10 opponent. And so, those come at a premium. I think there's still tremendous reasons to be worried about what Florida's going to do in the future. While simultaneously, I think we need to embrace the the small wins when we get them, right? And so I think you can live in both worlds. We can be excited about what happened against Kentucky and still looking at what's there, say, hey, I'm still concerned. I'm not going to believe that we've figured it out and this team all of a sudden is championship caliber and is going to do a lot of smart things. Still a lot of reasons for worry.
And we're going to talk about those games in just a second that we have left on the schedule. But I just kind of want to wrap up this Tennessee game a little bit. And I think the easy answer is DJ Lagway. But how in the world did UF hang half 100 on, honestly, statistically, one of the better defenses, not only in the SEC, but in the country? Did they do something different offensively?
They completed the ball down the field. I mean, I don't think Florida was doing anything remarkably different schematically. They still, refuse to put more than like 2 wide receivers on the field at the same time. They're still going to run 2 tight ends and a running back out there all the time. But when they have the chances, DJ Lagway was looking downfield and he did what he needed to do on those plays, and the offense looks different. So I think the Tennessee game, Florida should have put up far more points than they did. If they had just not stumbled away for the first half, you'd probably be thinking, okay, that was a decent output against Tennessee. But the coaching malpractice really shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, if you look at this simple stat right here with the Kentucky game, Allie, it's pretty mind blowing. DJ Dimes, as a lot of us like to call him, but DJ Lagway, for air yards this season alone, he's 11 of 16 with a 69% completion percentage of 477 yards on his passes that travel 25 yards or farther. 25 yards or farther, 11 of 16, 69%, 477. Graham Mertz this season is 1 of 4 for 27 yards. Graham Mertz for his career at Florida was 8 of 30, a 26% completion percentage with 288 yards.
Wow.
So in almost half of the reps,
right,
passes over 25 yards in far fewer games, DJ Lagway is obliterating that number. And that is a number that has just put a complete cap on this offense. But as Alan said, it wasn't like Florida came out against Kentucky and started running a lot of verticals, right? They did lean into it. We gave Billy credit. They started to lean into at least running a couple of them here and there. But as Alan said, even with DJ completing deep pass after deep pass after deep pass, Florida was still very conservative. They were still sort of not wanting to throw the ball vertically, even though Kentucky was inviting them to do so game plan wise. But I think that's the difference. Now I think the real question becomes, Georgia's not going to allow DJ Lagway to throw vertical passes. They're going to force him to do the things we've seen on film he struggles with, which are more of the short, intermediate passes. And we're going to see what Florida comes up with then as a game plan. But make no mistake about it, that is a player difference, right? That's not a scheme difference. It's not like they changed the scheme for DJ. But the fact that he was so successful down the field, as Alan said, led to that point explosion. And to me, that's a player-driven number. And Billy should get credit significantly here for recruiting DJ Lagway. He was not originally the number 1 quarterback. He was not a 5-star the entire time Florida was on him. And he was totally right with what he read about Lagway's abilities. And he deserves all the credit for selecting him. But again, those are remarkable numbers from Lagway. Remarkable air yard numbers there. And Florida would be very wise to do all they could to scheme up plays to take advantage of that. Of course, Alan and I don't think that's what's going to happen. We're still going to run 12 personnel. We're still going to have 2 tight ends up there. We're still going to kind of play with one arm tied behind our back against Georgia, at least in my opinion.
So we got a bye week. We got Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State. I think, Florida State obviously should be a win for the Gators. If they can't beat Florida State, I don't think we should even be having a discussion about whether or not we're bringing Coach Napier back. So let's remove that one. Let's look at Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. Who do you think Florida matches up with best and is most likely to be able to kind of steal a win there? Like, so far, we've beaten every team we should beat, and we've lost to every ranked team. But if we're going to get bowl eligible, which I think is a large ask at this point, but if it's going to happen, it's going to have to steal one from one of those 4. Who is most likely?
Well, I think you've seen Ole Miss have the most variance in terms of their output this season. I mean, LSU has been a little bit uneven, but it feels like they're ascending. Where I still want to see more from Ole Miss. Both those games are at home. Those feel like by far the most likely to produce a win. And Florida is still technically more talented than Ole Miss. It might not feel that way.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the star power they have. But I think that game probably looms large for the coaching staff too, because this is the name that's been linked to the Florida job all year. So I don't know. That would be the one I would circle, but LSU is probably adjacent to that. The Georgia game feels pretty far out of reach. Texas, obviously, we just watched them be super vulnerable, but
Mhm.
I still think they hold a fairly large advantage over Florida.
All right. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think talent, yeah, talent alone, I think, Ali, Ole Miss for sure. LSU is, Brian Kelly just quietly wins a lot of games, and I think he's been, quote, disappointing at LSU for some of the early season stuff. But if you look at his team by the end of the year, every year, they're a good team. So Florida playing LSU at the very end of the year
Yeah.
probably does not bode well for that. They're more talented. I think they get better and better. I think with Ole Miss, as Alan said, where are they with their headspace? I think for Lane, does he want the Florida job? If he does, is there a lot of extra pressure on that game? I mean, it's just there's a lot of opportunity for
If
Florida. I
Napier
think.
beats him, can you hire
What's
him?
that?
Can you hire him if Napier beats him?
Well, no, and I think that's the thing, and so that becomes like a really absurd pressure game in general, and so that adds to the. I think that benefits Florida if Napier is playing with sort of house money, like, hey, look, I'm probably fired anyway, and Lane is playing for everything, and he's already disappointed. Maybe they play tight. So I'm a Fallon. I think Ole Miss is the one where you look at winning, and then Florida State. We had said, hey, even if Florida wins 2 games before Florida State, if they lose to Florida State, then you're right back into the world where it's like this is an unserious, untrustable program.
Right.
Florida State's the worst they've been in their history. You can't lose to them in this situation. It doesn't matter. It would unwind everything. So I agree with you. Florida State's a must-win. You have to win that game. And then to think you're looking to get Ole Miss to 6-6, then the question, Ali, is that enough for people to believe they want to keep Napier for year 4? It's not enough for me. I don't think it's enough for Alan either. But for some people, it might be.
Well, and that was going to be my last question to you guys. I think that, since the summer, one of the talking points that you guys have probably heard, I've heard from the sources that I talked to, is that it's got to be at least 6-6. He's got to be bowl eligible. And, that really hasn't changed throughout the course of the season. But does perception matter? Like let's say we squeak one out against Ole Miss and we beat Florida State. But if we're not even competitive against Georgia and Texas, is 6-6 enough anymore? I mean, that would make us not competitive against basically any good team we played this entire season, I guess, outside of Tennessee, which I think, Tennessee is almost a black mark for me because we should have won if we had a better coaching staff. So does perception factor into this at all?
For sure. I think how you play is just as important as your results always, because you can look under the hood and, let's say you have a big rash of injuries at the wrong time, or I don't know, just some quirky things happen, and 6-6 against this schedule could have been a good result depending on how it played out. But I think as we've seen the schedule play out, getting to 6-6 is not going to accomplishment anymore, especially with FSU being in the toilet. So that would signal to me that we're not far enough, because also you have to factor in the reason we lost some of these games is because of the head coach, and I doubt the recruiting improves that much, where you're going to have like the worst class in recent memory for Florida if nothing changes. And so I think the fundamentals of what the program is supposed to be are off, no matter if we get to 6-6 or 5-7 or whatever.
All right, Alan, James, I appreciate you guys. Let everybody know where they can follow your work and follow you on social media.
Sure, you can follow us just by looking for the GNFP on pretty much any social media platform. And of course, we have a weekly podcast where you can find looking up the same thing, GNFP, anywhere podcasts are had. Ali, thanks for having us. It's been great to be with you.
I appreciate you guys. We'll have to do this again soon.
Absolutely.